Who wants to sex the process? Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Fantrax and Basketball Monster. And today's Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast is also brought to you by BetDSI. Use the promo code LOCKED10 and get a $10 free bet and 100% match on your first deposit. Today's show is also brought to you by Ravi Shiravuri, today's Patreon sponsor. So if you want to be a sponsor and help support the show, head to patreon.com/redrock_bball and you can be like Ravi and support the show, as well as many other perks that are available over there. My name is Josh Lloyd and you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball. Of course, in today's podcast, we're going to be looking at Tuesday's action, and then we're going to switch into DFS mode and preview the 10 games that we've got coming up for Wednesday. So, alright, we'll start off where we always start off, and that is, of course, the monstrous line of the night, and it goes to Anthony Davis again this season. He's been putting up, ridiculous numbers. He was going through a slight slump, I guess you could say, in December, but generally when he plays the Warriors, you get some pretty big games, and that's exactly what happened here. 28 points for Davis, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, 5 blocks. He hit a triple, and he was 10 of 14 from the field. He was 7 of 8 from the line. I think I touched on this yesterday, saying that his shooting percentage had been well down in December. Over the last 2 weeks, he's at just 42% from the field and 18% on threes, which is obviously a stupid low amount, and that's going to come back up. He's still the number 1 ranked player for the year in 8 category leagues, but he has dropped outside the top 10 over the last 2 weeks, mainly because that shooting percentage has come down. His scoring's dropped by 5 points a game as well. But he's giving you 3 blocks, still over a steal a game, 11.5 rebounds. So it's really the scoring that's dipped for Davis recently, and he's not going to continue to shoot at 42%, as we saw in this game where he went 10 of 14 and got some of that scoring touch back, I guess is probably the best way of putting it. So Anthony Davis, he's your monstrous line of the night yet again, and he's done that. I'd like to know how many times. So my stat keepers, Josh, Barry, Bazza, how many monstrous is that for Davis? Tweet them to me when you get around to listening to the podcast. All right, now it's time for a word from today's sponsor, and that is BetDSI. The basketball's back. You love it. Why don't you use your knowledge of basketball to make yourself some money? Head across to betdsi.com. It's been around for over 20 years. It's a top-rated business. It's a safe site to use. They're extremely fast with their payouts on winnings. And in addition to that, there's a great basketball special running on betdsi.com. Sign up today and you get $10 free to try their service. They're also offering a 100% bonus on your first deposit. There's great customer service, and there's hundreds and hundreds of wagers, whether it is basketball, whether it's football, whether it's the college football playoff coming up, or the bowl games, hockey games, international sports, soccer. BetDSI has all your options covered, so make sure you're checking it out. Plus, they also offer live in-game wagering on football, basketball, and other major sporting events. You can play virtually anything at BetDSI. So you head there today and use the promo code LOCKED10 to get your free wager and start winning today. Alright, let's head on to the waiver wire line of the night, and it is Lord Alfred Payton of the Orlando Magic. He turned in an historic game, really. He'd been as you know, reduced to a bench role, but put up some... These numbers don't come from bench players. 26 points for Lord Alfred, 3 rebounds, 14 assists, 3 triples, 1 steal, 9 of 12 from the field, and he hit 5 of 7 from the line, which is a very un-Lord Alfred Payton line. I've been talking about him for a while, since he'd been reduced to the bench, and maybe I did, but I don't believe I ever said that he was a guy that you want to drop, because the ability of him to get assists is huge, and over the last 2 weeks he's still getting 6 assists per game. He's getting a steal a game, and he's actually upped his field goal percentage in those last 8 games to 49%. He was always a high efficiency finisher in college. His jump shot is improved, hitting 38% of his threes over that time. The problem with him being off the bench is it limits his upside. It obviously didn't limit his upside in today's game, but basically every game that he's come off the bench, he has played more minutes than DJ Augustine, and he's played better than DJ Augustine. But instead of playing 30 minutes, he plays 28 minutes. So that limits what he can do. Now, he's really only useful for certain teams. The punt free throw situation is an issue. He's shooting at just 57% on 2.5 attempts so far this season. So that is somewhat of a concern for Lord Alfred Payton. But yeah, the assist numbers, the steals, and the ability that he could get 30 plus moving forward, because the Augustine situation isn't working, and he's struggled basically in every game that he's started. You have to like what Payton's offering. It's not going to be for everyone, but in certain situations, having Lord Alfred Payton on your team is going to work out fairly well. So make sure you're checking him out, seeing if it fits your team, seeing if you can deal with his deficiencies and use his positives in a strong way. But a really good night from Lord Alfred Payton. If you want to hear more about how the Magic are going, including their offensive outbursts today, check out Locked On Magic with Philip Rossman-Reich, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And of course, across the Locked On Podcast Network, there's a podcast for every team in the NBA where you can listen to whatever you want to hear about your favourite team. So Philip will have all the info on Alfred's historic night, the play of Bismack Biyombo with his banged up shoulder, what's happening with Aaron Gordon, Serge Ibaka. Philip has it all covered on Locked On Magic. And again, that's for Magic fans. You want to listen to anything else, check out the rest of the Locked On Podcast Network. They will have you covered. The young gun of the night, yeah, it's him. It's him quite a few times this season, Kristaps. 34 points for Porzingis, 8 rebounds, and then 4 triples, 3 steals, 3 blocks, 12 of 23 from the field, 6 of 7 from the line. That little mini slump that he was going through, the percentages are starting to get back to normal. He's at 43% now over the last 4, up from 41 over his last 8, averaging 22 points, 8 rebounds, 2.5 threes, and 3 blocks. Really, very little that you can complain about what Kristaps Porzingis is doing. Unfortunately, he fouled out with a minute to go, so maybe he would have been able to break his career high of 35 points. He ended up with 34. But otherwise, there's not a lot you can really complain about with what Kristaps is doing, and this is sort of where he's going to sit most of the year, in this top 25 zone with definite top 20 upside potential. So, yeah. Just enjoy it while it keeps happening, because I don't really think there's any reason why it's not going to keep happening. The dud of the night is on the same team, and that is Derrick Rose. He lasted just 9 minutes with those back spasms flaring up again. 2 points for Rose, 1 rebound, missed all 6 of his shots and hit both his free throws, so that's awesome. For people who think that Rose is having a great season, he isn't, especially from a fantasy point of view. And the last 6 games, he's shooting 52% from the field, which is massive for Rose. It's 10% better than what he shot last year. Still ranked 143rd because he gives you no threes, he gives you no steals, he gives you limited assists. 3 assists as a starting point guard is putrid, 0.7 steals is yuck, 0.2 threes is disgusting, and he's shooting 68% from the line. Yeah, he's giving you 15 points, but that's it. There's no other positive really in any other category, and that's fueled by this above average shooting that Rose is doing. I still think that you want to own Rose in 12-team leagues, but he's not showing me any signs of rebounding to anywhere close to his MVP type form, and I would expect that he misses at least a game here with these back spasms that have plagued him, unfortunately, for the second time in a week. So if you do own him, and if Brandon Jennings is available, he's going to be a guy that you head out and target. I've got no doubt about that at all. Let's now head into these 6 games for Tuesday. Let's talk about them in a little bit of extra detail and go through them. The first game we're going to look at is Memphis and Cleveland. We had of course no Marc Gasol, and then before the game, no Kyrie Irving. It didn't quite even it up because the Grizzlies are already missing Mike Conley, and predictably, well, not predictably, because nothing's predictable really with the Grizzlies. They got beaten. They got beaten pretty comfortably. In the end, Zach Randolph moved into the starting role ahead of Marc Gasol. 18 and 5 for Zebo, 2 steals and a block. A huge performance, but the 31 minutes is the anomaly here, and that's something that he just hasn't been doing when Gasol's been healthy. So he is okay as a real back-end 12-team league guy, but I don't believe he deserves 74% ownership. He's just not getting enough playing time, with the exception of this game. What I did like was Andy Harrison, who's back now to 30 plus minutes the last 2 games after Tony Douglas came in, challenged him. Harrison separated himself again. 13, 3 and 4 for Harrow with 3 blocks and a steal, getting it done defensively, probably a little bit above average with his scoring in this game, but he's just contributing in those other areas. He's only a short-term guy and he struggles to be a 12-team league player, but it's pretty clear that he's separated himself from the Tony Douglas challenge. And Douglas played just 15 minutes, had 4 points, 2 steals and a block, but not getting enough minutes to be really useful. Tone Allen down to 25 in this one, 8 points with 3 steals, so still getting the steals. Still is okay as a 12-team league guy. And Troy Daniels, 1 of 6 for 5 points in 20 minutes. You should have been off Troy Daniels a week ago, and hopefully you are. Jarrell Martin only played 19 minutes because he had some foul trouble, but almost doubled in that time, 8 and 10, while Troy Williams went 13, 6 and 6 in his 36 minutes. And unfortunately, Deontay Davis had to leave the court with a foot issue. The Grizzlies said that it's not serious, which is great, but he will probably miss some time. And it was good to have Vince Carter back for the Grizzlies. Not a great night from JaMychal Green. He had an opportunity, but 1 of 10 shooting sort of dropped that. 2 points, 8 boards, and 2 steals. You still have to hold on to him. It just wasn't a great night for JaMychal. Onto the Cavs, Kevin Love and LeBron put up big numbers, 29 and 13 for Love with 3 triples and 2 steals, while LeBron went 23, 6 and 8 with 3 steals. Both of them shot at an identical 9 of 17 from the field. They're both and Kyrie is going to be out on Wednesday for Cleveland's game return fixture against Memphis in Memphis. All 3 of those guys will not play. We had not seen any J.R. Smith really until this game, and he got hot really early. Had 23 points with 6 triples, 5 rebounds, 2 assists and a block. And with everyone else out, or every other star out, in the next game for the Cavs, I would imagine that JR is in a decent position for another good game. And we remember this is the only time he's actually shot the ball well, basically this entire season. So there's still some skepticism. I don't believe he is an absolute must-own player, but that's obviously a really nice performance if you rostered him in DFS. Tristan Thompson, just the 6 and 7 with a block, is sort of just doing what he needs to do. And Iman Shumpert, I thought he might have a bit of a bigger role with Kyrie out. He didn't, just 24 minutes, 5, 2 and 2. He has sort of value in 12-teamers, but far from a priority sort of guy. DeAndre Liggins, who started in place of Irving, 3, 5 and 4, 2 steals and a block. He'll start again along with Shumpert, along with Smith, along with James Jones on Wednesday. Liggins is the guy that's going to provide you the defensive numbers. But you probably won't have an active roster spot on Wednesday with the 10 games on, so adding him is probably not going to do anything, and then he moves back to a 10-minute role or so on the bench. But he has been a real plus for the Cavs this season, huge as a guy that no one really wanted, and he's been putting up some pretty impressive numbers for this team. Interestingly for the Cavs, Mike Dunleavy has been a DMP CD for 2 straight games now, so I'm not really sure what to make of that moving forward, but just hasn't played. You would think he gets into the game on Wednesday, but we just don't know at this point. The next game, the Orlando Magic and the Atlanta Hawks. Pretty weird stuff when the Orlando Magic can score 69 points in a half and finish with 131 in the game. Fueled by Lord Alfred's huge night, but Serge Ibaka was great as well. 29 points on 18 shots, hitting 4 triples. Only the 3 boards for Ibaka. Obviously not huge there, and no blocks, which doesn't help you in a massive amount. But nice scoring is always useful. Evan Fournier, 23 points, 6 assists, 2 steals and a block, was ridiculous. In fact, this whole team shot 59% from the field, with Peyton going 75, Ibaka 61, Fournier 73, Jody Meeks 70. And all those guys took over 10 shots per game. As for Meeks, he played 26 minutes, 20 points with 4 triples. He ate into some of DJ Augustine's time, and he's supplanted any sort of chance of CJ Watson, CJ Wilcox or Mario Hezonja getting regular minutes. So Meeks is a really nice 3-point streaming guy, probably more a 14-team league player, but if he's going to push into a role like this of 25 minutes, which seems unlikely, but he could, given Augustine has not played well, then there's something to like about him. There was no Nick Vucevic, so Bismack Biyombo played through his shoulder problem. 33 minutes for Biyombo, 7 and 9 with 3 blocks. You love the 3 blocks, you love the 9 rebounds, and that's really the only reason you own Bismack, not a must-own player. Aaron Gordon, 4 fouls in 18 minutes, 7, 3 and 2. Did have a block, did have a 3. Not a great night for him, and it's tougher and tougher to own him basically every game at this point. Jeffy Green played 31 minutes, 16-4 for Jeff. I leave him just for the deeper leagues though. It is really tough to consider him as a 12-team league guy, which could be unfortunate, might not be. Depends on how you feel about Jeff Green. On to the Hawks. Paul Millsap's been great since returning from his hip injury. 17, 9 and 5. 2 steals, a block, and 2 triples. This is back to the Paul Millsap we remember from last season or the year before, and he started off the season really, really slowly, and I'd been saying that he was a nice buy low guy for a while, and it's sort of coming together now. Dwight Howard against his former team only played 29 minutes, which is interesting in a game where he had 0 fouls, he had 20 points and 16 rebounds, he missed 1 shot out of his 10, but only still played 29 minutes. That puts somewhat of a cap on what he can do, but you've still been impressed with what he's done for most of this season. Same with Dennis Schroeder, who's actually a top 10 player over the last week and a top 25 player over the last 2 weeks. 19 points, 13 assists, 2 steals, and 3 triples. Now, some of his recent form is based on some very hot shooting, which will come down, but he should feel pretty comfortable about getting a top 50-ish type season out of Schroeder. Maybe not quite top 50, maybe in that 40 to 60 range, but that's sort of where he should sit. I don't think you can avoid owning Thabo Sefolosha at the moment. 30 minutes for Thabo as a starter, 17 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, 1 block. Getting it done in multiple categories. Will have the occasional offensive outburst as well, and it's really putting up big numbers for him, much bigger numbers than we've seen from him in quite a while. Kyle Korver hit 4 triples off the bench for his 12 points, but nothing else happening. Played 27 minutes. I don't think this means that this slight uptick in production is anything that we want to get too excited about, but he is putting up some good numbers here. While Timmy Hardaway had 12 points in 30 minutes. Kent Bazemore returned from his knee problem and played 15 minutes. Now, they said he was coming off the bench because of the injury. He was going to be on a minutes restriction. But honestly, I look at this and say 5 points in 15 minutes for Kent Bazemore, and I go, why isn't this something that actually could happen for the rest of the year? He was 2 of 9 shooting. He is not a good player. He's proven it basically all of this season, and to be honest, about the last 3 months of last season as well. And this is sort of where it feels like he is. I don't believe that you absolutely have to own Bazemore. His value has been inflated by steals, and if there weren't the steals, you're getting pretty much nothing out of him. And let's see how this runs, whether they move him back to the starting lineup. I think that they will, but with Thabo in there, maybe they don't, and maybe they keep him at a 20-minute or so role off the bench. It'll be interesting to see how they run with Bazemore, and this is not unprecedented. Last season, Thabo had the starting role over Bazemore, I believe, in January, and then Thabo got hurt and Bazemore took it back. So it's not an unprecedented thing. Let's monitor that situation, but even if Bazemore gets the starting job back, he's not a high priority player to me. The Warriors and the Pelicans. The Warriors were down for lots of this game, but they got up late. Triple-double from Draymond, 12, 12 and 10, 4 steals, 2 blocks, 2 triples. Not a good shooting night, but still a really nice, well-rounded triple-double. While Steph Curry, I said Anthony Davis always does well against the Warriors, while Steph always does well against the Pelicans. 30, 4 and 7, 5 triples for Steph. Or Durant had 27 points with 2 blocks, and Clay had 17 points. And it was a bad shooting night from Clay. This is pretty much just alternate nights now for Clay. He was 6 of 16 for those 17 points. They started their 3rd different centre in the 3 games that Zaza Pachulia has missed. JaVale McGee got the start, and he was clearly the best out of him. Kevon Looney and Andy Varejao, 9 and 5 for McGee in 16 minutes, and you can make an argument he was better than what Zaza Pachulia is. But none of them are going to get enough minutes to really make any dent on any leagues outside of, say, 16 or even 18 team leagues at this point, unless the Warriors just completely change their mind on what they're going to do. Andre Iguodala played 31 and he went 6, 9 and 3, and again, he's just a deeper league sort of player. On the Pelicans, Langston Galloway just continues to hit threes out of nowhere. Another 5 triples today for 20 points, had 3 steals and played 28 minutes, and the Pelicans used a lot of 3-guard lineups because their wings are pretty useless, and that's Solomon Hill. So we've got lots of Galloway, Frazier, Timmy Frazier, Drew Holiday, a little bit of Bud Hield, and some Etuan Moore. So they were playing the 1, 2 and the 3. So that gave them some extra minutes. After one game on the bench of playing 16 minutes, Timmy Fraser is now back to a bigger role. 30 minutes for him, 30 minutes for Drew. Fraser had 13, 2 and 8 with a steal and 3 triples. And if this is how they're going to run things, then of course you've got to own Fraser. As for Drew, he went 10, 8 and 6 with 4 steals and a block. So nice numbers for Drew. You just wish he didn't shoot 3 of 12, but otherwise some pretty impressive numbers. And it was actually, I said that Solomon Hill has struggled. It wasn't a bad night from him, 12 and 6 in 30 minutes, and that constitutes a good performance from him. They started Alexei Ajinça and Buddy Hield again. Both guys struggled. 13 minutes for Ajinça for 0 points. He did have 2 blocks, and he is a good shot blocker, but he's not playing enough. Unfortunately for me, we didn't get any Sheikh Diallo. We also didn't get any Omar Asher because they went really small. They played a lot of Terrence Jones at the 5 and Anthony Davis at the 5, and Hield played 18 minutes as a starter, having 7 points. Doesn't matter that he's starting, just keep him away from your 12-team leagues. Reggie Williams' hot shooting night from the other night didn't translate. 5 points in 9 minutes. Etuan Moore had 6, 2 and 5, and he goes back to 25 minutes, and that's probably where he's going to sit. And his value, his dip, he's a 14 to 16 team league guy at the moment. Let's look now at Minnesota and Chicago, the return of Tom Thibodeau to Chicago. The Timberwolves were down huge early and then erased a 21-point deficit to get the victory. Andrew Wiggins, probably the most impressive thing about Wiggins' line is the fact that he had 9 rebounds. He also had 23 points. He had 3 assists, he had 1 steal, he had 1 block, he hit 2 triples, and he went 8 of 17 from the field, which is obviously a slight change from what we normally see from Wiggo. Zachary Levine went 24, 6 and 6 in 43 minutes. Gorgie Jeng had 16 and 7, and Karl Towns had 16 and 12 with 3 blocks. So good numbers from their starters, but I really wanted to highlight Rick Rubio, who got a double-double. 11, 5 and 10 in 35 minutes. He had a 3, he had a steal, and he went 3 of 6 from the field. So it didn't hurt you in that area. Hit all 4 of his free throws, and that's more of what was expected. Now, I've heard reports of Rubio being dropped in 10-team leagues or 12-team leagues. If that's the case, I don't think you can't just let him linger on the waiver wire. He still can do it. The system was geared a little bit better towards him today. Still not ideal, but it translated into some numbers. So that's a positive for Rubio moving forward. And unsurprisingly, the bench did nothing. I suppose it doesn't help when they don't play at all. 9 minutes for the 4 bench guys combined, and they played 45 minutes combined out of a total 240, with the rest of the minutes just going all to the starters. On the Bulls, Robin Lopez started off on fire, 14 points. Really, a lot of those came in at the first 5 minutes. 5 boards and 4 blocks on 7 of 9 shooting. Dwayne Wade wasn't his best performance, 12, 5 and 8, got ejected late, had 2 steals and a block, but he ran point guard a lot of this game with Rajon Rondo out. They started Jaren Grant, and I thought he was okay. 8 and 3 with 2 triples, but played just 19 minutes as they ran a lot of Isaiah Cannon out there and put the ball in Dwayne Wade's hand. Cannon is terrible. I don't really think that he should be even getting minutes, to be honest, in a rotation. I'd much rather Michael Carter-Williams, but he's not available. But even giving some of that to Denzel Valentine, who was a DMP CD in this game, along with Bobby Portis, the Bulls' last 2 first-round draft choices, which is a slight concern. Jim Butler wasn't hitting his shots, 9 of 22, still ended with 27, 9 and 6 with 3 steals, so a pretty good night from him, while Taj Gibson has definitely cooled off. I still think that you look at him in 12ers, but in 10-team leagues, I don't believe Taj Gibson is going to be a must-own player for the remainder of the season. Next up, we have the New York Knicks. They took on the Phoenix Suns, and I mentioned earlier that Rose was out with that injury. So we got some Brandon Jennings, but we also got a lot of Ron Baker, who played almost the entire fourth quarter. 15 minutes for Baker, 0 points, 2 assists and a steal. So I don't think we need to get overly excited about adding Baker. Jennings was a guy that he did struggle mightily in this game. He wasn't great, but still gave 5 assists and a steal. And this is why I've mentioned that even when Rose came back, I'd be okay with hanging on to Jennings just because he's giving you solid assist numbers, which can be really difficult to find. Courtney Lee, 6 of 8 shooting is ridiculous. 14 points in 29 minutes for Lee, 2 steals and 2 triples. I'm normally not in favour of Courtney Lee, but he's playing fairly well at the moment. A 14-team staple and a borderline 12-team league guy. Joakim Noah is terrible. 22 minutes for him, 8 and 8, which actually isn't too terrible in terms of statistics. 3 assists, 1 steal and a block, but horrible from the line, just 2 of 7 from the line. Normally he's a horrible field goal shooter as well, and he's getting outplayed by Kyle O'Quinn basically every night. Now O'Quinn played 28 minutes here, had 22 and 14 with a steal, and at this point you have to consider O'Quinn someone that you own in 12-team leagues. He looks like he's going to be locked into a backup role, but I don't really care if he plays 4 to 5 minutes more than Noah. That's completely fine with me. It is hard for him to get this many minutes moving forward because he does get a lot of fouls, and that does limit him. But even in the 22 minutes a night that he's been getting over the last couple of weeks, he's a clear must-own player. So I think you should be looking to see if you've got an expendable option to add O'Quinn, and let's just see where it goes, because he's consistently outplaying Joakim Noah. Billy Hernangomez had a huge game when O'Quinn missed last time. In this game, Hernangomez DMP City. So I don't think there's any concern, which there was earlier when they would split the minutes or they'd alternate the backup minutes. It's all going to O'Quinn at the moment, and he's pushing Joakim Noah out of a role, and he's closing games over him as well. Wasn't a great Mallow night, 3 of 15 for 13 points with 6 rebounds and 5 assists. If for some reason you can buy low on Mallow, I would recommend it because his shooting, it will improve. It won't keep at this piss poor level. Speaking of piss poor shooting, Devin Booker went 3 of 16 for 12 points. He had 1 rebound, he had 1 block, he had 1 3. That is all he had. He has been a major disappointment this season. We thought that he was in control in pre-season, and the Suns were running things a lot differently. He was running the offense. Eric Bledsoe was not. He was quite passive. He was taking a backseat to Booker. Booker was giving you 4 or 5 assists a game. He was scoring 20 plus points. And yeah, it is pre-season, but it was more play style trends that I was interested in when looking at the way they were running things. Well, now they've moved back to let's give the ball to Bledsoe because he's comfortably our best player, and he's playing well. 31, 6 and 8 for Bledsoe with 2 steals. And Booker, I know I always cop a lot of shit for this, but he is not a good shooter. He might be a good shooter at some point. He is not a good shooter. He's shooting under 30% from 3 in the last 2 weeks, 31% from 3 for the season, 41% from the field, under 40 in the last 2 weeks. He is not a good shooter. He may well become a good shooter. He looks like he will become a good shooter, but he is not a good shooter at all at this point. And when you can't shoot and can't score, which is what he's currently going through, and you provide nothing defensively and you can't rebound, and you're a poor defender, his numbers are really, really bad. He's outside the top 200 over the last 2 weeks. I wouldn't be dropping him, but we have to reevaluate where he's at and the change in what the Suns are doing with their lineups and with their play style, I guess, that he is being not limited because he's still getting his shots, but he doesn't feel like he's working in the same system as everyone else. Tyson Chandler with Alex Len out, that's fine if he plays 41 minutes. 13 and 23 with a steal and a block, absolutely no problems because that's, you've got to run your best center out there, and he's a lot better than Alan Williams. My issue with running 40 minutes plus for Chandler when Len's available, that's what my issue is. But Chandler's a guy you have to consider in basically all leagues at the moment. There's chances that he plays 30 minutes on most nights. He could play 23, but these bulk rebounding nights, the high field goal percentage, 10, 12 points, maybe gets you a block and a half, but the big rebounding, the big field goal percentage is the real appeal here. Marquise Chris didn't get early fouls, which is a real surprise. Still ended with 5, but played 31 minutes and went 14 and 12 with a 1-1. That is fantastic. That is sort of what I was hoping for when they announced him as a starter earlier on. I thought, all right, let's go. He's going to play 26 to 27 minutes. He's got 1-1 potential. Let's see how it goes. And I grabbed him in lots of leagues. Unfortunately, he started playing less minutes as a starter than he did as a reserve, and he's been marginalised completely until this game. I'd like to see him do it again, and I'd like to see him keep out of foul trouble again before I really consider him an ownable guy. But it was nice to see a flash of what might be in a situation where he keeps himself clean of fouls. PJ Tucker played 40 minutes with TJ Warren out again, 13 and 7 for Tucker, 3 steals and a block with a triple. A nice performance from PJ. I don't believe that he is a must-own player in 12-team leagues. He's a 14 to 16-team league guy whose value is going to drop off pretty significantly whenever TJ Warren happens to return from his quote-unquote minor head injury. The last game of the night was a bit of a laugher. The Oklahoma City Thunder and the Portland Trailblazers. Vic Oladipo was out with his wrist issue, so the Thunder started Jeremy Grant, and he's just not a good player. 26 minutes for Grant, 11 points, 1 rebound and 1 steal. You should keep him far away from even 14-team leagues. Steve Adams was decent, 14 and 4 with 4 steals, and Russ did not get a double-double. Didn't get a triple-double, but didn't get a double-double either. 20 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 threes, and his efficiency is killing you at the moment. 7 of 19 from the field here from Russ. Andre Robertson, in the similar Tabo category, but probably a step below, 7 and 4 with 2 steals and a block and a triple. Gives you the nice defensive numbers, but doesn't quite have the offensive upside as Tabo does. With Domantas Sabonis, he grabbed 9 boards in his 20 minutes. I thought this could have been a real chance for a big Enes Kanter game, but unfortunately, in very un-Enes Kanter style, he couldn't hit shots. He was 1 of 7 from the field and only 4 of 7 from the line for 6 points and 7 rebounds. If he normally goes at his 60% and 80%, we're talking about a 12 and 7 line, which is impressive in 18 minutes, but it didn't come together for him. While Samaje Cristen played 27 minutes, he's also just not very good. 4 points with 3 assists, a steal and a block, but there's 20 team leagues maybe for Samaje, and even then he's going to be DNP-CDing or playing with the Oklahoma City or the Oklahoma Blue or whatever they're called as soon as campaign returns. For the Blazers, Mo Harkless bounced back, 15 and 4 with 5 steals and a block. I said I wanted to give him a couple more games of reprieve. Well, yep, you're still in my must-own category. While Mason Plumlee's hot run continued, 18, 7 and 2, a steal and 2 blocks. Lillard and McCollum, they didn't need to exert themselves too much. 17 points with 9 assists for Dame, 15, 4 and 4 with a triple one for CJ. And Al-Farouq Aminu, who went from doubtful to starting last game, was then decided to be a scratch for this one. So he was out. They moved Noah Vonleh into his former starting spot, and he did exactly what he normally does. 5 and 4 in 19 minutes. He's a ceremonial starter. For whatever reason, that's the way that they like using him, and he just has not really shown... He's shown improvement this year, but he hasn't shown me improvement enough for me to think he's a good player. A triple one from Evan Turner with 14 points. He has stepped his game up recently and is pushing more 14 teams than 12 teams. But his numbers have improved and his play has improved as well. Alright, that's it from a relatively light on Tuesday. I guess I'm going to take a break and then we're going to be back to preview a pretty hefty 10-game Wednesday in the NBA. Alright, let's talk perfect DFS from Tuesday. On FanDuel, Lord Alfred Payton had 50.6 and Eric Bledsoe went for 51.2. At shooting guard, J.R. Smith with 33 and Zachary Levine with 40.2. The small forwards, Jim Butler 52.8 and Wigo at 42.3, both opposing each other. Draymond had 51.4 and Porzingis had 53.6 and Kylo Quinn was your centre at 42.8. For a total of 417.9. On DraftKings, Alfred 54.75, Smith, JR 36.75, Jim Butler at 54.75, Draymond 58.5, Tyson Chandler 46.25, Bledsoe 54.5, O'Quinn 45.5, and Porzingis at 57 for a total of 408. They are really high scores for a night with only 6 games on. There was so much value scattered all across the NBA, and then we had surprise performances like Alfred Payton, putting up numbers when it was not all that predictable, I guess is probably the fair way of putting it. But we have seen the Hawks being a team that's let through a ton of fantasy stats to point guards so far this season. Let's get into a 10-game Wednesday when there's value right across the place, especially with the Cavs resting all these guys. There are so many low-priced shooting guards and point guards as well, but you could stack minimum salary shooting guards and then load up in other positions and still get a pretty good result, I feel. Let's talk Toronto and Philly. The Raptors are favoured by 8.5 and the total is 206.5 points here. Sergio Rodriguez and Joel Embiid should both be back. The Spanish Chocolate's dealing with gastroenteritis and Embiid dealing with an elbow. They're both listed as probable, whereas Nerlens Noel is questionable, but Sixers beat reporters think that he will not play. So he's probably closer to doubtful than he is questionable. So if you're on Basketball Monster, use our what if scenario. move Noel to out, and then see how that affects the rest of the minutes for everyone else. Let's talk point guards here. Kyle Lowry, I was going to say against his former team, that's not incorrect. In his hometown, where he went to college, and he was honoured today with a Villanova, I believe, framed USA jersey. So he does generally like to play well in Philadelphia. The Sixers are much more competitive at home than on the road, but the Raptors have been killing teams. So there is blowout potential definitely in this game. Lowry at 8,700 on a night where there's a lot of cheap value around at point guard doesn't strike me as a great option. Corey Joseph, on the other hand, at 3,900, he is an interesting punt pivot. If you believe this will be a blowout, he had 22 in the last game in 27 minutes. He's also had a 26-point game in his last 5. So when the minutes come, Joseph has been okay recently. He also has got some downside that he could have 7 points or 8 points. But at 3,900, he could really return some nice value for you. As for Spanish Chocolate at 5,000, I like him here. He had 31 in his last outing. He's averaging over 26 in the last 5. Jared Bayless isn't around. Yeah, TJ McConnell played well in the last game, but I still think that we're going to get close to 30 minutes out of Spanish Chocolate, and that should give us in excess of 25 points. So I think he is a pretty decent guy to take a look at. As for McConnell, well, he had almost a triple-double in the last game. He got 40 points in that one. He's at 3,900. If you think that they decide to split the minutes or give him the bulk of the minutes, you can look at him there. I just don't. I don't think that'll be the case. So I would restrict him to GPPs, and even then, I wouldn't feel too great about it. DeMar DeRozan's at 8,400. If you're spending up on shooting guards, it's him or Jim Harden. I don't think I don't think spending up at shooting guard is going to be the best option, though, given the way that this slate is panning out. But DeRozan would be okay if he did that. At 8,400, you should feel relatively good against the Sixers defense that he can drop 40 points. Gerald Henderson, don't feel good about anything that he does. 3,800 for Nick Stauskas. Yeah, much better, much more comfortable in a bench role, but really tough to use him, I think, with so much other value around Hollis Thompson and Norm Powell, the other two shooting guards. Small forward, Damari Carroll at 43. Still just really feels underpriced. Had 26 in the last game. They bumped his price up by $100 on FanDuel. Not enough. I still reckon he is and I've got my dislike of Carroll as a value player, but at that price, he's really, really tough to go past. Bob Cov's at 4,700. He had 30 in the last game. The Raptors' defense does concern me a little bit, so he's probably a fade to me, but he's always got tournament upside, as does Terry Ross. He's at 3,800, and he dropped 35 in the last game. He can get hot, and we've seen that time and time again this season. So I'm all for considering Terry and thinking that he's had 2 35-point games in the last 5 games. So there is a chance that it happens, and that's what you're looking for in your GPP lineups. Where's my upside coming from? Can it all hit together? And it could be a blowout. He could get some extra minutes. So and it's a great matchup as well. So Terry Ross is a considerable option. Power forward, Pat is at 4,300. I don't want to touch that. Ersan Ilyasova at 56. If Nerlens Noel is indeed out, which we believe he will be, that really helps Ilyasova's value, and at 5,600 he becomes playable. If Nerlens plays, it's really tough because Nerlens is going to have to play some 4, or Jahlil Okafor is going to have to play some 4, or the process will have to play some 4 as well, and that takes Šarić and Ilyasova's minutes away. But if Noel is out, then at 5,600 I think that he is definitely okay to take a look at. As for Šarić, I don't think you want to use him really under any circumstance, neither Noel or Siakam. At centre, the process is up to $7,000 now on FanDuel. It's still not totally dissuading me. I still think that he is a really nice mid-priced centre, and you should feel confident about getting 36. And I say that because he's averaging 36 in the last 3 games. He's averaging 36 in the last 5 games. We're projecting him at 37 points. He had 36 in his last game. And at 7,000, you get 36. I'm all for that. Jonas Valanciunas at 5,300. He's priced a little bit more attractive on some of the other sites, but the matchup is very positive. But could it be a blowout, and could that mean we're going to see more Bebe in there? Yes. Could he get roasted by Joel Embiid? Yes. But opposition centres have put up some really big numbers against the Sixers as well, so he could be an interesting tournament pivot at that price on FanDuel. As for Jahlil Okafor, he's averaging 29 across the last 3, but you have to bear in mind that a few of those came without Embiid. I don't think I'd want to spend the $5,000 on Okafor just at this point. And as for Bebe, getting some minutes, and he's always got the ability to go for 30. He's at 3,800, so he is absolutely a tournament play, no doubt, because we've seen that upside from him be flashed plenty of times so far this season. The next game we take a look at is the Charlotte Hornets. They're taking on the Washington Wizards. Dead even in terms of Vegas line here. The total is 212.5 points, so a pretty decent total, which is appealing for us from a DFS point of view. Injury wise, nothing for us to really check out come game time, although stuff always creeps up out of nowhere. Kemba Walker at 7,400. Hate the matchup, hate the way Kemba's been playing with his form. This is a hard fade for me. It would be a contrarian option. I'm not interested in it though. I was going to call him John Walker. I love Johnny Wall at 9,700. He put up 49 in the last game. He's averaging 50 over the last 5. The matchup is beautiful. He's done well historically against Kemba. There's no reason for me to think that John Wall will get less than 45 here. He's carrying a lot of this team. The starters carry so much. Nothing's going to change here. This is a really good spot to use John Wall. If you're going, say, cheap at shooting guard and want to go one expensive, one cheap point guard, I think Wall is probably the one to go for. Even though Russ Westbrook is playing, you can save yourself a couple of $1,000 and I think get yourself close to 50 with Wall, whereas Westbrook's numbers haven't been really reflecting his price over the last couple of games. He looks to be marginally wearing down. Shooting guards, Brad Beal at 6,900. He's thanks Quagmire. His minutes have dipped a little bit. They still aren't all that low, but averaging 34 over the last 6 with a positive matchup, and we know he's going to get a ton of looks. Otto Porter eliminated from the offense basically entirely for the Wizards. Getting 35 out of Beal doesn't feel like it's an impossibility. I think it feels pretty good, to be honest. You could look at the other side. Nick Batum's at 6,800, but his numbers have been far inferior to Beal. He has had a history of doing well against Washington, but I'm not all that interested in using Batum here. Let's look at the small forwards. Otto Porter is at 5,500. As I mentioned, he just is getting ignored. He's averaging under 19 points in the last 5 games, still playing 34 a night, but not getting any points really, and just averaging 18 points in the last 3. Had a 13-pointer in the last game in 37 minutes. Now, he could always change around and break out, so there is huge upside potential for Otto Porter, but in cash, I would have zero confidence in using him. Kelly Oubre getting the extra minutes. He's actually averaging 24 points in the last 3, and at 3,900, you can totally see that working, considering they trust none of the bench players apart from Oubre. It is risky though. There's no cash game reliability there, and I wouldn't totally write off Marco Bellinelli on the other side. Closing games, playing more minutes than Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. He's variable. And at $4,000, I'd probably rather take Oubre and save the $100. Oubre has been out producing Bellinelli, but I think for consistency wise, you're going to get 20 plus or 21 out of Bellinelli in most nights. So he's in consideration. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist probably shouldn't be in consideration. At power forward, Marv Williams at 4,300 had a nice game, one of his better games for the year actually, at 22 points. I don't love it. He hasn't been awesome this year, and that's probably putting it mildly. So I'm not really sure that you can find a way to use Marv. Markieff, at the other hand, at 5,000. I always like using Markieff. The price is generally pretty low. I think we'll just restrict him to tournaments here, though. It's going to be tough to use him in cash. I'd rather use Beal and Wall in cash than use Markieff. But if you're looking to find some dollars, 5,000 for a starter who'll play 35 minutes, who should be able to get you 25 points, I think is not a bad deal, and that's sort of where Markieff fits to me. I don't want Frank Kaminsky anywhere at the moment. At centre, Marcin Gortat is at $6,000. Has been really poor lately, averaging under 25 in the last 5. He's got a good history against Charlotte, averaging 34 in the last 3 games, but I don't feel all that confident with using him. And his opponent is Cody Zeller, who has been impressive and putting up decent numbers, but it doesn't translate all that well to DFS. So at 4,700 for Zeller, in a tournament, yeah, maybe. In cash, I can't see myself having Cody Zeller on any of my teams. Let's talk about the Indiana Pacers and the Miami Heat, which is the next game. The Heat are actually favoured by 1.5, which seems weird to me. The total is 205 points here. We're looking at the Heat with Justice Winslow, who is doubtful, Luke Babbitt, who was declared healthy for the last game and then didn't play, so we expect him to potentially get back here. And on the Indiana side, Rod Stuckey is questionable with that right knee contusion that limited him to 21 minutes in the last game. Let's talk point guards. We've got a bit to like here. Goran Dragic is at 7,400. He had 47 in the last game. Yeah, the Pacers are sort of middle of the pack in terms of allowing points to opposition point guards. I think at 7,400 you should feel fairly confident about getting close to 35 with Dragic, so he makes for a solid mid-priced play. Tyler Johnson at 5,300, been a little bit down the last couple, just had 21 in the last game. I still do believe in him, but with a couple of these guys returning like Richardson and James Johnson, some of his usage will drop, and that's going to limit his upside. If he was at 4,700, I'd be all for it. At 53, I'm probably going to steer clear of Tyler Johnson. Jeffy Teague at 6,800, huge game against Charlotte in the last one. Massive difference between playing Charlotte and playing Miami. So I think that Teague is not someone that I'm going to be looking at. Joshy Rich at 4,500 has been okay since coming back, not spectacular. At 4,500, I think it's a pass. Wayne Ellington, despite the return of these players, had a really weird game where he put up a lot of assist numbers. 28 points in that game at 4,600. I can't really envisage a situation where I say, you know what, I really need to get myself some Wayne Ellington in this game at that price of 4,600. Put him at less than 4,000, then sure. Rod Stuckey at 39. Well, I'd like to know if he's playing first, but if he is playing at 3,900, he beat that value last game before he got injured. Had 23 points in 21 minutes, and I think that you could be fairly confident of expecting 20-ish points from Rod if he happens to play. So that's a situation to monitor. We know Monte Ellis is out. Scooter Magruder played 30 in the last game, put up 11 points. That's the sort of thing that's more common from him, so he's not a player to look at. Small forwards, James Johnson at 4,900. Looked really good in the last game, but only translated to 22 points. I like him better on some other sites where his salary is a little bit more depressed. This matchup is quite positive for him, but at 4,900 there are probably going to be better options that you can go to at small forward. Paulie George at 8,300. A little bit disappointing with only 30 in the last game. I don't love him. I think there are better players that you can use, but if you've saved a lot of money on some of these cheap options, then you might have cash around. 83 on Paul George might be fine. I think the better small forward option at that similar price is going to be Kawhi Leonard, who we'll talk about a little bit later. Little dog Glenn Robinson III, his salary has jumped $800. Cool. Well, he's now at 4,400. Yes, he started, but he took literally 2 shots, I believe, in that game. He did a little bit defensively with 3 blocks. I don't really put faith in him being a 3-block guy. At 4,400, I don't really think that's worth the investment. CJ Miles at 4,600, not doing anything to deserve that salary either. He's jumped by $400 as well. He's a fade also. Power forward, 4,900 for Thad Young. Not a good matchup against Miami. He's been really poor apart from that one game plucked from his ass. So I don't think we want to look at him. And Joshy McRoberts, Luke Babbitt, Lavoy Allen, they're not interesting. Like McRoberts has started the last few and actually put up 23 in the last game at 4,000, which is great, but it's just unreliable. Centres, we've got a good matchup. Hassan Whiteside and Miles Turner, 8,700 for Hassan. I think he's got an opportunity here to put up another 45-ish type game, and I think if you're spending up at centre, he's one of the better options that are out there if you don't want to spend up the 11,000-ish for DeMarcus Cousins. Miles Turner at 6,200 put up a whopper 40 in the last game, but that was a little bit out of the blue. Now, I think that he can do pretty well against Hassan Whiteside. Centres can put up numbers against Whiteside, but do I expect 40? No. Could he get to 35? Yeah, but I think probably 30 to 31 is more where he sits. And at 6,200, I'm not sure the upside is quite there. So for sure, he's worth a look. The matchup is relatively positive, but not as keen on Miles as what I would be in certain other situations. Let's look now at the next game. We're talking Los Angeles Clippers and Orlando Magic. No, let's skip that one. Let's go into Los Angeles. We'll do that. We'll come back to that one in a sec. We'll talk Los Angeles Lakers and Brooklyn Nets. The where am I? The the Nets are actually favoured by 1.5. This is the beginning of a 7-game road trip for the Los Angeles Lakers, so it could be, I guess, somewhat of a struggle for them. The total is a massive 228 points, so that's something we do have to look into. There's very little blowout potential, I would guess, in this game, so this could be a very interesting fantasy situation. Justin Hamilton is likely back from his migraine issue, and the Lakers have got a couple of guys listed as probable. Julius Randle and D'Angelo Russell with their hip and knee complaints respectively. Both guys should play. That's the meaning of the probable tag. So we expect both of those guys to be in uniform and ready to go. So that should be useful, obviously, because they're going to be key parts. But are they going to be good DFS options? Let's start by looking at the point guards. Obviously, the big news for Brooklyn was in the last game the return of Jeremy Lin. He is at 6,700, which I don't love. He played great. He put up 27 points in 20 minutes in the last game, but the fact that he was back and then they immediately jumped his salary up by $400. If we hear that he's starting and there's no minutes restriction, the matchup is really good for Lin. Against a former team. Not that there's really anyone on that team resembling anyone he played with apart from Nick Young and maybe Tariq Black. But the fact that he could still be on a minutes limit, he might come off the bench, it's not appealing at that sort of an elevated salary. So not really sure why they bumped his salary up that much. He is probably a fade to me. On the other side, D'Angelo Russell's the same story. He's coming back from a knee injury. He's at 6,000. We assume he's going to be under a minutes restriction as well. So I don't think we can really use either of the two big gun point guards in this game. Jordy Clarkson at 4,900 has played much better since Russell has been back. 4,900 is not an expensive price. He isn't quite getting to where he needs to be, but I don't hate him more in a tournament sense than in a cash sense. And to get 25 or even 30 out of him, it's not too hard. I do think that I won't have him in any lineups though. Let's look shooting guards. Shawnee Kilpatrick at 53 had a really nice scoring night in the other game, but only resulted in 17 DFS points. With Lin back at 5,300, I don't want anything to do with Kilpatrick. Lou Williams finally shit the bed at 6,200. He put up just 20 points. That's obviously not ideal. He'd been killing it prior to that. 6,200 is risky with Russell back because he probably won't get 30 minutes. He'll be down to 25, 26. So I think that Williams is a bit of a fade until that salary starts coming back to the 5,000, 5,500 type of mark, which it should do, and it could very well do pretty soon. So I think he's a safe guy to lay off at the moment. Uncle P at 3,900. The minutes are fine for him, but I don't really think he's a great DFS target, especially with so many other good cheap options on the board. Joe Harris at 39. Let's move on. Rondé Hollis-Jefferson at 3,900. He played 15 minutes in the last game and put up 21 DFS points, which at 3,900 actually returns value. The problem is his minutes are just so up and down. Could he return value at 3,900? Sure. Would I want to trust it? I don't think I would. So I think that he is probably a fade until he just gets consistent 26 to 27 minutes. Luol Deng on fire at the moment. 4,200 for Deng, putting up 28 points in the last three, dropped 30 in the last one. The salary's risen by $500. The matchup is very, very good for Deng. I wouldn't have the balls to go cash on it, but in a tournament situation, I can totally understand using Deng at 4,200 and hoping for another one of those 30-point performance. I just don't think that the likelihood of it is that high. Bojan Bogdanovic, after I said how consistent he was, he dropped 12 points in the last game at 4,400. He's okay, but I really just don't really like using him. And Brandon Ingram is not really in consideration now that he's gone back to a mid-20s minute role. Karis LeVert, minimum salary. I just like talking about Karis LeVert. I don't think he's going to have any DFS impact, but he's played every game since he made his debut, and he looks like he's going to be a part of the rotation moving forward, which is awesome. Julius Randle's at 6,400. Has really struggled recently, averaging under 25 in the last three, 27 in the last five, and that doesn't belie a $6,400 salary. To me, despite this being a really positive matchup, is somewhat of a fade, but he has done well against Brooklyn in the past, so I would throw him into a tournament and see how it goes, because he does have some significant upside but he also has a pretty significant downside as well, and when he's not playing well, he's ugly to watch. Trevor Booker is more stable, more solid. He's at 5,900. You feel like you're going to get 27 at least out of Booker most nights, probably even more. So I think that he is a relatively safe cash game play. Larry Nance not getting anything happening at the moment. He always has upside though at 3,900 because he can go out there and have those nights where he gets 5 steals or grabs 10 boards and has 15 points. It doesn't happen often though, but you're always searching for upside in tournaments, so you do have to consider Nance in those situations. Brookie Lopez at 7,500. Yeah, look, his minutes do get capped to a degree, but in his last 5, he's averaging 36 points in 30 minutes. So I'm okay with that, especially in a positive matchup against the Lakers. His price is a little bit more appealing on some of the other sites rather than FanDuel, but he's got a relatively high floor with a minimum score of 30 over his last 5 games. You feel relatively confident with Brook that you're going to get at least 30, and you've got upside to go 40, even 50 points, and the positive matchup is impressive. Tim Mozgov, really hard to consider using him, I believe. Alright, let's go back to that other Los Angeles game that I moved past before. The Los Angeles Clippers and the Orlando Magic. No spread released for this one just yet. We don't expect Austin Rivers to play. He's currently questionable, but I don't think he is on the road trip with the team. I just don't think that he plays. And Nick Vucevic for the Magic, who missed today's game. We'd have to consider him questionable at this point. Let's talk point guards. Lord Alfred Payton, just the casual 51 today. He is now averaging 31 across the last 5 with 2 50-point performances in there. The problem is there's a 15-point performance thrown in there, and now he has to take on Chris Paul. So this is not a situation where I'm really interested in using Alfred Payton at all. Coming off the bench, Chris Paul, regression, all that stuff. See you later. Chrissy Paul, on the other hand, at 9,600, he's been putting up consistently 45-point nights. The Magic give up points to point guards, despite them having a really good defense. Point guards do put up good numbers against them, so I think Paul is a decent option at 96. If you want to go away from the John Wall or Russell Westbrook options with an expensive point guard, he's the one to go for. And TJ Augustine always has tournament upside, but he's struggling in a big way, averaging 16 over the last 5, only 20 minutes a game. Yeah, he's starting, but he's just not playing enough, and with the play of Payton, with the play of Meeks, it's limiting what he can do, so he's not a high priority guy to me. Ray Felton gets a bump if Rivers is out, as we expect. At minimum salary, I'd want someone else to be out before I start looking at Ray Felton. At shooting guard, JJ Redick at 4,200. No thanks. Jamal Crawford at 4,100. That's a little bit more appealing for me. I think he's a decent tournament play at 4,100, but neither of those Clippers shooting guards should really be considered for cash, in my opinion. Evan Fournier at 5,500, he should absolutely be considered for cash and for tournaments. The downside is the Clippers matchup, which is quite good defensively against shooting guards, but he is on fire and carrying this team a lot of the times, averaging 31 across the last 3. So I think he's a really useful guy to look at. Whereas Jody Meeks at minimum salary, he had 30 today, so congratulations if you played him at that salary. Really tough to rely upon that moving forward though. Aaron Gordon at 4,100. I don't think we can even consider that. And Jeffrey Green at 3,700. Well, he's putting up decent numbers in terms of scoring, but it's not translating to great DFS numbers. He had 19 today, which at 3,700 is not bad. It is value, but I don't put a huge amount of faith in it. Is there a revenge factor for Jeff Green? Who knows? He's played against too many teams for him to care that much. Let's talk power forwards. Blakey Griffin here at 9,100. This is great. This is where you spend your money, I believe, when you go with those cheap Cavs shooting guard players. Spend your 9,000 on Blake Griffin and feel pretty confident about getting 45 points. You could also go for 62 on Serge Ibaka. He had a big game today, but it translated to just 38 fantasy points, which for a big game you would hope it gives you more. I just don't think that 62 is quite the right price. It just feels a little bit expensive to me. At centre, Bismack Biyombo at 4,400. The salary's dropped by 400. Now he is more in play to me, especially if Vucevic is out. I think he's worth a look. Whereas the opposition is DeAndre Jordan. He's at 7,000. He's struggling to reach value most nights. I think that he is probably a bit of a fade. Vooch, I don't think we're looking at, despite the salary dropping to 6,700. Really tough for me to see him being a player that I'm going to have on a roster. All right, which game are we heading to next? Let's look at Sacramento and Houston. The Rockets are favoured by 9.5, and the total here is 217. The Kings have ruled Rudy Gay and Ben McLemore doubtful for this game, so they probably won't play. And Matt Barnes, who was out of the last game for rest, you would have to assume he re-enters the rotation with Gay out. We don't 100% know that, but that's my guess at this point. Point guards. Let's talk Darren Collison, who's at $6,000. He's been solid, but he's not $6,000 worth. And for some unknown reason, his salary has jumped by $500. I have no idea, considering he's averaging under 25 over the last 3. I think maybe they just don't want you using Darren Collison, because in a shit matchup against Patrick Beverley, when he's not producing, and then add an extra $500 onto his price, I can't see why you would even consider it. As for Beverley, he's at $5,400, so that's a pretty sizable chunk of salary. He's been playing well, averaging 28 over the last 5 games. But at $5,400, you want him to average 28. That's sort of right where he needs to be. So I don't really think there's much value in Patrick Beverley, unfortunately, on FanDuel at least. Ty Lawson at $4,000, had a good game in the last one with McLemore out. It wouldn't be a terrible punt to see some more Collison-Lawson backcourts, with McLemore most likely missing as well. So you could consider him. I just don't really enjoy it. Garrett Temple at $39. Well, he started the second half in place of McLemore. He's been playing well. The plus-minus has been fantastic for him, but unfortunately plus-minus doesn't really translate to DFS. And in his big game in the last one, where he was plus 41, he dropped 19.7 points, which at $3,900 is barely passable. You could absolutely have a look at him and think maybe stuff starts happening for him at $3,900, and I would totally understand that. And you could also make the argument that if he started and played 30 plus minutes, that his floor at $3,900 is easily achievable, and that would make him a decent cash play. I just don't think his upside is all that high. Eric Gordon raining threes, not raining DFS points though. At $5,300, he's averaging just 22 points per game over the last 3, and he's averaging 5 triples in those games. So on a site where you get 3-point bonuses, Eric Gordon is a much more appealing option. Unfortunately, that's not FanDuel, which is where I'm deriving these numbers from. Jim Harden's at $11,700. We know what Jim's giving us. It's 55 most nights, but it could be a situation of fading him to get some real cheap guys in and get value out of them, and spend your money up in other areas. So you have to consider that as an option. The defense-wise, the Kings have been actually pretty good against shooting guards, but actually pretty good against point guards, which is where Harden's playing the majority of the time. So that's something to bear in mind. He's averaging just 46 the last 3 times that he's played against the Kings, which is nowhere near enough at $11,700. So while it might be a bold strategy, fading Harden could be the way to go, just with the way that this slate has panned out. $5,700 for Trevor Ariza. Hasn't quite been there recently. With Gay out, I think that he's a real chance to exceed that. So he's definitely a tournament option for me. While Sammy Decker not producing, so I don't think we need to look there. Let's talk power forwards, or we could talk Matty Barnes, who in his last 5 games amazingly had a 43-point performance, and he's averaging 10 over the last 3. So he's been very up and down. We assume he's going to play. I don't think he's going to play as much as someone like Omri Caspi, who we'll talk about in a sec, but at $4,200, you could look at him in a tournament. I wouldn't. At power forward, Caspi, the salary's jumped by $700 up to $4,400, but you would have to assume that he will start in place of Rudy Gay, and he should be looking at 25 plus points, which at $4,400 makes him a great option pretty much everywhere. Ryan Anderson at $4,900. He does well against Sacramento. The matchup suits him, so I don't normally recommend Ryan Anderson, but I think that this is an opportunity to use him, and I think that it could work in your favour, and he could go for 30 plus. I think there is upside for him to have a good game. It is a good matchup for him. Montrezl Harrell, Anthony Tolliver, Willie Cauley-Stein, the other power forwards, they're not going to be really in play too much. Let's talk centres. Costa Koufos had a monster in the last game at $3,700. You would have loved it if you used him. I just don't think it's all that reliable, so I reckon he's a guy to fade. $5,600 for Clint Capella. He's not being used enough, or not being used well at the moment, and the matchup against Boogie means I'll just stay clear away from that. DeMarcus Cousins is at $11,500. He got you 60 in the last game. He's 54 to 55 most nights. If I'm spending $11,500 or 700 in the case of Harden, I'll spend it on Boogie and I'll take the cheaper shooting guards. I think that's probably a better way to go if I've got that $11,000 that I want to spend. That's the way that I would look at it at this early point. I've been talking about it all night, talking about cheap shooting guards. Let's talk about the game where these cheap shooting guards are coming from. That's Cleveland at Memphis. There is no spread or total or line or anything out at the moment. We have got no LeBron James. We've got no Kyrie Irving. We've got no Kevin Love. We assume we've got Marcus Gasol back for Memphis, but for Cleveland's where a lot of this value is going to be coming from. Let's talk point guards. Andy Harrison, well, he's been putting up good numbers. He's at 4,200. He dropped to 29 today, which is obviously impressive against no Kyrie. No Kyrie again. At 42, going a cheap point guard, which is a very viable option. I can consider Harrison someone that's in play. He is a little bit volatile though, so not with 100% confidence that I would do that. On the Cavs side of things, there is no point guard that is worth considering. The shooting guards. The Cavs are starting on FanDuel 4 shooting guards who are all priced at minimum salary. J.R. Smith, DeAndre Liggins, Iman Shumpert, and James Jones are all listed as shooting guard on FanDuel, and they're all minimum salary, and they're all starting for the Cavs tomorrow. So you can't use all of them. On other sites, there's different positional allowances that will allow you that. So you've got to pick. You could pick 2 of these ones. Actually, Shumpert's not minimum salary, my mistake. He's at 3,800. You could pick 2 of these guys and feel pretty good about it. J.R. Smith dropped 33 at 3,500, and he's been poor this year, but man, if you think he's not taking a bunch of shots in this game, then you don't know J.R. Smith. Who's he deferring to? Tristan Thompson? DeAndre Liggins? J.R. Smith at 3,500 is probably going to be the first guy I lock into most of my lineups. And then you've got Liggins, who had 20 points today in 32 minutes, gets it done defensively. You've got Shumpert, who's had a 26-point game in the last 5 at 3,800. He's going to start and probably play 30 minutes and take on ball handling responsibilities, and he's been shooting the ball efficiently. He gets steals as well. He's another option. James Jones is probably the worst of these, but at 3,500, he could easily get 20 points. I think he's comfortably the weakest out of all those guys, though. So Smith, Liggins, and Shumpert, picking 2 of those 3 is a relatively decent way of setting a lineup, I think. And Smith and Shumpert would probably be the 2 that I go for, but I can totally understand putting Liggins in there ahead of Shumpert, who he outperformed him today and he played more minutes. It's going to be interesting to see how they run that. I still think Shumpert has a little bit of a higher upside than what DeAndre Liggins does. On the Memphis side of things, Tone Allen at 5,100. The minutes were reduced with Vince Carter back, so he might be a little bit tough to use at 5,100 just with those minutes and the usage coming down, especially with Marcus Gasol back in this game as well. Troy Daniels, forget about it. And Jordy McRae barely saw any playing time today, just 3 minutes, which you would have thought he would have. Now, he should get more playing time with all these guys out. And at 3,500, he joins that group of players who are 3,500 shooting guards for this team. I just don't think he's a high priority guy. Dick Jefferson at 3,500. I thought that he would start in place of LeBron. He's not. I thought he'd start maybe in place of Kevin Love. He's not as well. But he could get 27, 30 minutes off the bench. And at 3,500, he becomes another punt option. So you could potentially go with Smith, Shumpert, and Jefferson at 2 shooting guards and small forward and have spent 10,500. Jefferson's not a great option there, but we saw that last year in the finals he put up numbers. We saw this year when he played and started some games, he put up some decent numbers as well. So he's not a horrible guy to look at. I touched on earlier, Mike Dunleavy had been out of the rotation the last 2 games. You'd have to imagine he plays in this one, and he's a minimum salary guy as well, but he's way down the list. For the Grizzlies, Vince Carter and Troy Williams are their 2 small forwards. I don't think that you really want to use either of those guys. Power forward Channing Frye at 3,600. I would think that Frye is going to get a bigger role as well. He should get 25-ish minutes maybe, or he can get around that zone, hit some threes, maybe block a couple of shots. At 3,600, Frye is absolutely a GPP option. There's so many in this game, and finding the right ones is going to be tricky, but Frye is looking to be in a good spot. I love Tristan Thompson at 5,000. He's not going to have Kevin Love taking rebounds away from him. He's going to be able to grab a lot of offensive boards and put them back from whatever junk gets thrown up by J.R. Smith. I think at $5,000, getting 25 points out of Tristan Thompson shouldn't be that much of a chore. Yes, the Marcus Gasol thing's a factor. It probably limits him from going for 35 points. But to get 25 with the way that things are shaking out, I think it's okay. As for Gasol at 8,900, you don't want to take Whiteside, you don't want to take Cousins, then you can get 45 out of Gasol. That's what he's been doing. He's averaging actually 49 over the last 5, and his lowest score in that time frame has been 43. This is assuming that he plays, which we are assuming. I think that spending that money on Marc Gasol is absolutely one of the right ways to go. And him, Whiteside, Cousins, 3 really high price centers. I think you almost have to use one of those 3 guys in this not day and age, but with this situation that's happening. Detroit and Dallas. The Pistons are favoured by 4.5 points, and the total is a paltry 189.5. That means it's not going to be all that appealing from us in a fantasy point of view. Let's talk point guards. Reggie Jackson's at 5,600, not returning that sort of value at this point. The matchup is not ideal. Fade him. Darren Williams at 63. He's actually getting close to that sort of value. I just don't like it against the Detroit team with such a low total. It's not ideal. Devin Harris, Ish Smith. I don't think we want to use either of those guys. Fade the point guards. Shooting guards. Seth Curry is at 42. On the surface, he had a decent game in the last one. 17 DFS points, though, tells us otherwise. Not interested in using him. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope should be back at 5,700. He hasn't got it clicking yet with Reggie Jackson. That's too expensive. If it was saying 4,700, I'd be all over it. 57 is not interesting for me. I can spend 5,800 on Wes Matthews, who's averaging 35 over the last 3 and is generally looking much better. I would consider him comfortably over Caldwell-Pope. I probably would only look at Matthews in a tournament, given the way that KCP defends. That could put the clamps on what Matthews is doing, but Matthews is clearly the superior option out of those 2 guys. At small forward, we've got Marcus Morris at 5,200. Had a really good game in the last one. I'm not sure how high his upside actually is, but he's done really well against Dallas in the past. I think getting 25, 26 out of him should feel pretty comfortable. The pencil at 6,300, I'm not interested in a negative matchup for him. He's scoring okay. He's doing bugger all else though, so he's not really a keen guy to look at for me. What about Dorian Finney-Smith? He's got the DFS initials. He dropped 35 in the last game, but his salary has risen by $600. He's had a really hot streak, averaging 27 over the last 3, but prior to that, he was struggling in pretty similar minutes. For sure, he's a guy to look at in the tournament, but given the pace of the game, given the opposition, I don't really, and given the somewhat fluky nature of his performances, I don't think that he is an absolute lock despite a really huge performance in the last game. Let's talk power forwards. Dwighty Powell at 4,300. The opportunity is there, but he never seems to be able to grasp it. I could consider him a GPP only option, whereas Toby Harris is down at the moment. 5,900. This is not the matchup to hope that he bounces back, just given the low pace. But I think the next time the Pistons play, I'll be looking at Toby in that situation, and Johnny Lua not really getting anything happening at the moment either. I like Andre Drummond here though. He's at 8,400. He's been a lot more consistent, it feels like, since Reggie Jackson has been back. He's averaging 48 over the last 3. I think you should be able to get 40 from him in this matchup despite the low pace. And on the other side, Salah Mejri, who had 27 in the last game. He's at 3,900. Now, Andre Drummond can be an issue, but sometimes he's not an issue at all defensively. He allows players to go for big numbers. Mejri has upside. He's no stability, though, so he's not a good cash play. But in tournaments at 3,900, well, you would have loved it getting the 27 out of him in the last game. And that's sort of what he can do again. He can actually probably be better than that. So he does have definite tournament upside. Let's talk about the next game, and that is the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Utah Jazz. No spread released at the time of recording for this one. We don't know the status of Victor Oladipo, who missed today's game with that wrist issue. What we do know is that Rodney Hood is questionable. We know that Dante Exum is questionable with a knee, but 2 reports on Derek Favors. One from Tim McMahon of ESPN saying that he will play, and the other, the official one, from the Utah Jazz saying that Derek Favors is questionable. I think that we look to see him as probable, given the 2 conflicting reports and given the Utah Jazz's reluctance to give us information on injuries. I think that we see Derek Favors return in a limited role, possibly off the bench, not back to his full minutes, but I think that we do see him return. Let's talk point guard. Shelvin Mack should get the bulk of the minutes here or definitely if Exum doesn't play, at $4,000, one of those great cheap point guards that are out there. You pair him with a Wall, a Smith, a Shumpert, and there's your backcourt with $3,000-$4,000 or less guys. And then you can get some other money happening in other areas. As for Westbrook, his salary is actually down to $12,000, but hasn't quite been where he needs to be. He's not far off, but this is a back-to-back against a good defensive team. Westbrook is relatively matchup proof, but it's not a bad situation to fade him in here. Spend your money maybe on Cousins, on Whiteside, on Gasol, maybe on Harden, depending on how you want to go. 12,000 is much more appealing for Westbrook, and I could totally see it, but he's not locked in as an absolute must play to me. Shooting guards, there's not a lot to love here. Rod Hood, we don't think he plays. Anthony Morrow, he's not worth looking at. And Victor Oladipo, I'd be stunned if he played as well. So no real shooting guards to consider. Andre Robertson at 4,000. He's got upside in a tournament, but that's really about it, I believe. Whereas Gordo Hayward at 8,100, I love him at that price. With Hill out, he's still going to be taking on usage. With Hood potentially out as well, it's a big one for Gordo. And if Hood remains out, then we look at Joe Ingles, of course, at 4,000, who's averaging 25 over the last three, and Joe Johnson at 3,700. Ingles is probably the preferable guy who's played big minutes in the last two games, and he would be a nice, probably alternate low price player to some of the other people who'll be running guys out. But as you can see, there are a lot of cheap options at the 1, 2 and the 3. Power forwards, Trey Lyles 4,100. Well, he wasn't worth using with Favors out, so with Favors coming back, I think we can forget about it. Enes Kanter against his former team, a team that's going to run two bigs a lot of the time. It makes it appealing, but then you've got to factor in the fact that he goes up against Rudy Gobert, and you get Gobert, and that's a shit matchup. So I think that Kanter is someone I will leave alone. Obviously, Domantas Sabonis, and I won't be using Derek Favors. At centre, Steve Adams, well, could he get Gobert? Absolutely. He's averaging 17 points in the last 3 times he's played the Utah Jazz. That's not ideal. 5,300 off a back-to-back. I reckon we can leave Adams alone. And as for Gobert at 7,600, the return of Favors dampens him a little bit. If Favors doesn't actually play, I would consider Gobert at 7,600. If Favors plays, I would probably just lay off him a little bit. Let's go to the last game of the night, and that is the Boston Celtics and the San Antonio Spurs. Spurs are favoured by 8, and the total is 201.5 points here. Let's talk point guards. Marcus Smart at 5,100. No Isaiah Thomas, so Smart should start again. He had 32 in the last game. The salary's jumped by 400 on FanDuel, but I'm absolutely fine with using Smart. I think that you should be looking at 25 comfortably, and with 30 plus upside, I do really like him. If you want to go cheap, another option you can do is Terry Rozier at 4,300. He's a little bit higher than what he is on some other places, but he's getting a lot of minutes, and that could easily convert into 20 plus points. I don't love it as much on FanDuel as I do in some other areas. 4,400 for Patty Mills, good matchup for him here. I think 25 shouldn't be too unexpected, but I don't think it's a great play, and Tone Parker's not an awesome one either. Danny Green at minimum salary, upside's huge, ceiling's low. In a tournament, sure, but even then, I'm not all that interested against Avery Bradley. And speaking of Bradley at 6,900, it's too expensive against a Green and Kawhi Leonard wing defense combo. Let's forget about it to me. Speaking of Kawhi at 8,300, I think he's one of the better expensive guys out there. At small forward, I said already I'd prefer him to Paul George. I think you're getting 40 almost no doubt here in a relatively positive matchup. His opponent, Jay Crowder at 5,600, I would like it, but you're playing Kawhi. So, yeah, when you're already not that great offensively, the Kawhi-ness could be death for Jay Crowder's DFS value. At power forward, LaMarcus Aldridge has been brutal this year. 6,300 though, it's a really good matchup. Boston Bigs, we know that they allow points. I think that Aldridge becomes a tournament option just for that reason, and think that, man, he has to get better at some point, and this is a great opportunity for him to do that. Dave Lee, Amir Johnson, Jonas Jerebko, really tough to use those guys, I believe, really in any sort of setting. Pau Gasol at centre, similar story for Aldridge. Good matchup against the Boston frontcourt. 6,000 for Pau is probably just a tad expensive on FanDuel. It's not horrible, but it's also not the most appealing one. And Kelly Olynyk, Dwayne Dedmon, Tyler Zeller, no. And of course the other centre is Al Horford at 7,900 against the Spurs. That makes me want to fade him. I don't want to be spending almost $8,000 on Al Horford when there are 10 other games or 9 other games on with other better values going on at centre. Alright, let's talk about the picks of the day now. On FanDuel, Spanish Chocolate at 5,000, Goran Dragic at 74, and Johnny Wall at 97. Shooting guards, J.R. Smith 35, Brad Beal 69, and DeMar DeRozan 84. Small forwards, DeMari Carroll 43, Marcus Morris 52, and Kawhi at 83. Power forwards, Channing Frye 36, or Omri Caspi. Obviously, I had done this graphic before the Rudy Gay doubtful news had come out, but you can throw Caspi in there. Markeith at 5,000 and Blake Griffin at 9,100. And the centres, Tristan Thompson 5,000, Joel Embiid 7,000, and Hassan Whiteside 8,700. On DraftKings, Iman Shumpert 37, Lynn at 56. I'm much happier with Lynn at that reduced salary on DraftKings, and Johnny Wall at 86. J.R. Smith at 35, Jordy Clarkson 5,000 and DeRozan at 8,000. Small forwards, Dick Jefferson at 3,000 as a tournament option. Paulie George at 79 and Kawhi at 81. Power forwards, Channing Frye 35, Marcus Morris 53 and Blake Griffin 8,500. And the centres, Tristan Thompson 49, Pau Gasol 55 and Hassan Whiteside 8,300. Let's talk Australian sites. Moneyball, Jeremy Lin is minimum salary. You have to love that at 3,500. Goran Dragic 65 and Johnny Wall 93. The shooting guards, J.R. Smith 35, Brad Beal 61 and Jim Harden 10,900. Small forwards, Omri Caspi 35, Trev Ariza 54 and Kawhi 82. Power forwards, Marvin Williams at 3,600 is ridiculously cheap. Aldridge at 57 and Blake Griffin at 8,200. And the centres, Jonas Valanciunas 47. The process, Joel Embiid at 5,300. Again, stupid cheap. And Hassan Whiteside 83. On Draft Stars, Terry Rozier at 5,000. Marcus Smart 9,050 and Johnny Wall 18.2. Shooting guards, Iman Shumpert 5,850. Shawnee Kilpatrick 89. I like the cheaper price for him over there. I don't really like him on any of the other sites. And DeMar DeRozan 15,550. Small forwards, DeAndre Liggins 5,000, Marcus Morris 9,350 and Gordie Hayward 14,050. Power forwards, James Johnson 6,450. You can put Omri Caspi in amongst those as well. Tristan Thompson 9,500. Andre Drummond 14,450. And at centre, Salah Mejri 5,000. Brookie Lopez 12,300. And Hassan Whiteside 14,800. Alright, we are done today, guys. Check out the rest of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you can find a podcast for your team every day. Follow me on Twitter at redrock_bball and check out patreon.com/redrock_bball. Of course, Basketball Monster is around with all your DFS stuff and seasonal league projections and tools. We're done. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Joel Embiid, TTP.